Michael Jordan was just passing through when he saw the kid, barefoot, playing like a star on a cracked old court. Then it happened. His ripped sneakers finally gave out, sending him crashing to the ground. The crowd laughed. People stared. But instead of looking away, Jordan smirked, because what he did next would silence everyone, rewrite the game, and change one boy's life forever. Stay till the end, because this story will leave you speechless. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The rhythmic sound of a basketball bouncing against cracked asphalt echoed through the quiet evening air. The court was worn, the paint faded, the hoops rusted, but none of that seemed to matter to the group of kids playing an intense pickup game. Their sneakers squeaked against the pavement as they moved, their bodies weaving in and out, trying to find an opening. The sun had begun to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows that stretched across the court, but no one was ready to call it quits just yet. Leaning against a chain-link fence just outside the court, Michael Jordan watched the game unfold, his hands tucked into the pockets of his hoodie. He had come here to visit an old friend, not to draw attention to himself, but something had caught his eye. Amidst the chaos of the game, one boy stood out, a kid no older than 12, smaller than the others, but playing like he belonged in a professional league. His movements were precise, his footwork smooth, his confidence unwavering. Every crossover, every step back, every jump shot looked as if it had been practiced 1,000 times. He wasn't just holding his own against older, bigger players. He was dominating them. Jordan's sharp eyes tracked the boy's movements, impressed by his raw, unrefined talent. But then, something else caught his attention, something that made his chest tighten. It wasn't just the way the boy played. It was what he was playing in. His shoes, if they could still be called that, were barely holding together. The fabric was ripped, the soles were peeling away, and with every sprint down the court, it looked like they might fall apart entirely. Yet despite the clear discomfort, the kid pushed forward, playing as if none of it mattered. Then in an instant, everything changed. The boy made his move, stealing the ball from an opponent and taking off down the court, his eyes locked on the hoop. He moved fast, dribbling with control, weaving past defenders with ease. As he approached the basket, he leaped into the air, extending for a layup. But just as he was midair, his left shoe finally gave out. The worn-out sneaker tore apart completely, sending him off balance. His body twisted awkwardly, and he crashed to the ground, skidding across the rough pavement. The basketball bounced away, rolling to the edge of the court, forgotten in the stunned silence that followed. For a moment, no one moved. Then a few of the older kids chuckled, shaking their heads. "Man, you need some real shoes," one of them muttered, his voice dripping with amusement. Another snickered, nudging his friend. Maybe if he had Jordans, he wouldn't be eating pavement. The boy sat up slowly, his face burning with humiliation. He barely acknowledged the laughter around him as he reached for his broken sneaker, gripping it tightly, as if holding it together might somehow undo what had just happened. He tried to shove his foot back inside, but the sole had completely detached, leaving it useless. From his spot near the fence, Jordan let out a quiet breath, his expression unreadable. He had seen a lot in his career: arrogance, struggle, greatness. But this moment was different. This wasn't just a case of bad luck or a clumsy fall. This was a kid with nothing, giving everything, playing as if the game was the only thing in the world that mattered. His fingers curled slightly inside his pockets. He could have turned away, pretended he hadn't seen anything. But that wasn't who he was. This kid had something special, and Jordan was about to change his life, but not in the way anyone expected. The boy sat frozen for a moment, his palms pressing into the rough asphalt as the laughter rang in his ears. His chest tightened, his stomach twisting in humiliation. He had taken worse falls before, but this wasn't just about hitting the ground. It was about the way they looked at him, the way they laughed like he was nothing. Slowly, he pushed himself up, brushing the dirt off his scraped knees. The sting of the impact barely registered. His pride hurt more. "Man, you need some real shoes," one of the older kids chuckled, shaking his head. Another boy smirked, nudging his friend. "Maybe if you had Jordans, you wouldn't be eating dirt." The words cut deeper than they should have. He wanted to fire back, say something, anything. But what could he say? They were right. His shoes weren't just old. They were done. The sole of his left sneaker had completely detached, sitting a few feet away like some discarded piece of trash. The fabric was frayed, the stitching barely holding together. It wasn't even a shoe anymore, just scraps pretending to be one. His fingers curled into fists at his sides, his nails digging into his palms. He wouldn't let them see him break. Not here. Not now. He reached for his busted sneaker, gripping it tightly, trying to force his foot back inside. It was useless. The moment he lifted it, the front completely flopped open. The laughter continued, some of the kids shaking their heads, already moving on, passing the ball around like the game was more important than what had just happened. But one person hadn't moved. Michael Jordan had stepped closer, his hands still tucked into the pockets of his hoodie, his gaze locked on the boy. He had seen that look before. He had felt it before. That burning frustration, the kind that made you want to disappear, but also made you want to prove them all wrong. Jordan didn't say anything at first. He just watched, his sharp eyes scanning the kid's face, the way he clenched his jaw, the way his shoulders tensed like he was trying to hold himself together. Then finally he cleared his throat, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Kid," he said, his voice steady, firm, "let me see that shoe." The boy's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing in confusion. The other kids stopped dribbling. The court fell silent. No one knew it yet, but everything was about to change. The boy blinked up at the stranger, his fingers tightening around the tattered remains of his shoe. His heart pounded in his chest, half from the fall, half from the confusion swirling in his mind. He wasn't used to people paying attention to him, at least not in a way that wasn't mocking. And now this man, this tall figure in a hoodie, was looking at him with something different. "Who are you?" the boy asked, his voice cautious. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he knelt down, his large hands reaching for the destroyed sneaker. The boy hesitated, but eventually handed it over, watching as the man turned it over in his grip, examining it like a detective studying evidence at a crime scene. A slow chuckle rumbled from the man's chest as he shook his head. "You play like a pro," he mused, tapping the loose sole against his palm. "But these things, they belong in a museum." A few of the kids nearby snickered, but this time it wasn't mean-spirited. Even the boy, still rattled from the fall, let out a nervous laugh. I don't have anything else," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. The man finally lifted his head, studying him with sharp, knowing eyes. "What's your name, kid?" The boy hesitated, glancing at the other players as if saying his name out loud would somehow make him smaller in their eyes. But something about the way this man was looking at him, like he actually cared about the answer, made him speak up. "Derek." The man smiled, a small but unmistakable glint in his eyes. "Well, Derek," he said, placing the ruined sneaker down beside him, "today's your lucky day." Without another word, the man reached for the duffel bag slung over his shoulder. The zipper hissed open, the sound cutting through the heavy silence hanging over the court. Derek and the other kids leaned in, eyes wide with curiosity. The man dug inside for a moment, his hand disappearing into the depths of the bag. Then slowly, he pulled something out. The court fell completely still. In his hand sat a pristine, untouched pair of Air Jordans, gleaming white with red and black accents, the Jumpman logo stitched cleanly onto the side. Derek's breath caught in his throat. The other kids murmured, nudging each other, eyes darting between the shoes and the man holding them. Derek swallowed hard, his pulse racing. "Wait, are you serious?" The man just smirked. The whole court leaned in, waiting for his answer. The court had never been this quiet before, not even during the most intense games when the score was tied, and everything came down to one last shot. But now, every kid, every bystander, even the wind seemed to hold its breath as Michael Jordan extended the pristine Air Jordans toward Derek. The boy's hands trembled as he stared at the shoes. His lips parted, but no words came out at first. His mind struggled to catch up, to process what was happening. "Wait, you're just giving these to me?" Derek finally whispered, barely believing his own words. Jordan gave a slow, confident nod. "You earned them," he said simply. A murmur rippled through the group of kids standing nearby, the disbelief spreading like wildfire. "No way," one kid muttered. "Man, those are real Jordans, brand new." Derek swallowed hard. He wanted to reach out, to take them, to feel the weight of something new, something real against his palms. But something held him back, some invisible force that whispered in the back of his mind, "This can't be." Broken souls to breaking ankles. Derek is the real deal. The video didn't just trend, it inspired. People started reaching out, asking about Derek, wanting to know his story. Strangers began setting up fundraisers, raising money for kids in poverty who couldn't afford proper basketball shoes. It wasn't just about one game anymore. It was about how many kids were out there, just like Derek, waiting for someone to believe in them. Then came the moment no one expected. Derek's name reached ESPN. A breaking news segment aired. From the streets to the spotlight, the viral basketball prodigy caught the attention of the greatest of all time. Derek's story wasn't just inspiring social media anymore. It was making headlines. The energy inside the packed arena was undeniable. Fans filled every seat, their cheers blending into a constant hum of excitement. The massive jumbotron overhead flashed highlights from the preseason. But tonight wasn't about the league's veterans. It was about a rookie, a young player making his NBA debut under the brightest lights. Derek Jones dribbled at half court, his warm-up routine smooth and practiced. His focus was unshakable, his breathing steady. Every movement was calculated, the years of hard work reflected in the way he handled the ball. But amidst the adrenaline, there was something different about him. It wasn't just his game, it was what he wore on his feet. Unlike the other players sporting the latest high-performance sneakers, Derek's shoes were worn, creases across the leather, faded logos, and scuff marks on the soles. They weren't just any pair of Jordans. They were the Jordans, the same ones he had received on that street court all those years ago, the ones that had changed everything. He glanced down at them for a brief second, his fingers tracing the laces. These shoes had carried him through the toughest moments of his journey, from that first one-on-one game against Rico to every hour spent practicing after school, every late-night session when he felt like giving up. And now they had carried him here, to the biggest stage in basketball. A deep breath steadied him. Then, with quiet determination, he turned his gaze toward the sideline. Sitting in the front row, dressed in a tailored suit, was the man responsible for this moment, Michael Jordan. The living legend sat with his usual calm presence, observing Derek closely, his expression unreadable. But beneath the composed exterior, there was something else in his eyes: pride. The crowd noise dulled in Derek's ears as his world zeroed in on the man who had given him a shot when no one else had. He had dreamed of this moment, but now that it was here, he didn't need to say a word. Instead, he did something that made the entire arena pause. As the referee prepared for tip-off, Derek straightened, lifted his hand, and pointed directly at Jordan. The cameras caught it instantly, flashing between the rookie on the court and the legend on the sidelines. The commentators fell silent for a brief second before one of them finally spoke. "And there it is, folks. A moment we won't forget. That's not just a tribute, that's a promise." Jordan leaned forward slightly, a smirk forming at the corner of his lips. Derek gave one last nod. Then, as if time had snapped back into motion, the referee tossed the ball into the air, and the game began. The crowd roared as Derek leaped for the ball, the weight of his journey pushing him higher than ever before. The stadium lights burned bright, illuminating the court as the final seconds ticked away. The game had already been won, but this moment wasn't about the scoreboard. It was about something far greater. Derek Jones dribbled past half court, his movements fluid, effortless, his confidence unshakable. He wasn't just another rookie anymore. He was a player who had fought for every second he had on this court. A kid who had once played on cracked asphalt with torn-up sneakers, now standing beneath the roaring applause of thousands. From the sidelines, Michael Jordan watched in silence, arms crossed, expression unreadable. He had seen many greats rise, many young stars burn bright. But this was different. Derek took a breath and met Jordan's gaze. For just a second, everything faded. The noise, the crowd, the cameras. All that remained was the memory of that dusty old court, the day everything had changed. He could still hear the laughter from the other kids, still feel the sting of humiliation when his shoe had fallen apart mid-game. But more than anything, he could still hear Jordan's voice, steady and certain. "You earned them." Now it was time to prove just how much. Derek picked up speed, cutting past his defender with ease. The lane opened up. This was it. One last move. One last moment. He took off, his body soaring toward the rim, time seeming to slow as he cocked his arm back. The crowd gasped, phones flashing, the announcers losing their minds. Then, "You're going to basketball camp." The words hit like a full court pass straight to the chest. Derek's grip on the shoebox tightened, his mind racing to catch up. I, he struggled to find words. You mean, like me? Jordan chuckled. I don't see anyone else who just dropped a fadeaway on a guy twice their size. The other kids erupted again, some clapping, others laughing in disbelief. Bro, do you know what this means? One of them shouted. Derek's throat felt dry. This had to be a joke. But, but. He tried to protest, but Jordan held up a hand. Listen, he said, his voice lowering so only Derek could hear. You've got something special, but talent, that only takes you halfway. You need the right people to see it. You need opportunity, and I can give you that. Derek swallowed hard. His entire body felt like it was on fire, adrenaline still surging through his veins. But why? The question escaped before he could stop it. Jordan tilted his head, studying him for a long moment. Then with a small smile, he simply said, because someone once did it for me. Derek stared, his heartbeat thudding in his ears. The reality of it settled in. Michael Jordan wasn't just giving him shoes, he was giving him a future. Derek's hands trembled as he looked down at the shoebox, his mind spinning. Was this real? Was this actually happening? The sun had dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement of the basketball court. The air still buzzed with murmurs from the kids who had witnessed what felt like a miracle. Derek, his fingers still clutching the shoebox, stood frozen, as if afraid that moving might shatter the reality of what had just happened. Then from across the court, a voice cut through the noise. Derek! Heads turned. A woman hurried toward them, her breath unsteady, her face a mix of confusion and concern. She looked exhausted, her uniform from the local diner still clinging to her after what had likely been a long shift. But the moment her eyes locked onto Derek, everything else faded. Mom? Derek's voice cracked as he took a step toward her. Jordan watched as the boy hesitated, looking down at the box in his hands as if wondering how he could even begin to explain. A few of the older kids whispered, piecing it together. That's his mom. Derek's mother finally reached him, her gaze bouncing from her son to the crowd, then to the man standing beside him. She recognized the face instantly. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Michael Jordan? She breathed. Jordan gave her a small nod, the corner of his mouth twitching into an easygoing smile. Ma'am. She turned to Derek, her eyes wide. What is going on? Derek exhaled sharply, his emotions tangled between disbelief and overwhelming gratitude. Mom, he's sending me to basketball camp. The weight of those words sank in slowly. She blinked, her expression unreadable at first. Then her lips trembled. She swallowed hard, turning to Jordan. You're really doing this? For him? Jordan met her gaze, his voice steady. Yeah, I am. For a second, she just stood there, gripping the strap of her worn-out purse as if grounding herself. Then without another word, she reached out, pulling Derek into a tight hug. Derek stiffened at first, but quickly melted into the embrace. He hadn't realized how badly he needed this. To see the pride in her eyes, to know that this wasn't just changing his life, but theirs. She pulled back just enough to whisper, You deserve this. Derek wiped at his eyes before they could betray him. He turned back to Jordan, his voice thick with emotion. I won't let you down. Jordan studied him for a moment, then nodded, his smirk returning. I know. Derek looked down at the new shoes in his hands, then back up at Jordan, realization dawning. This wasn't just about basketball. It was about proving he was worth believing in. What started as a small crowd gathered around a local basketball court had turned into a global moment, one that people couldn't stop talking about. A grainy phone recording, shaky at times but clear enough to capture every pivotal second, made its way across social media. It showed Derek, the kid with torn-up shoes, standing face-to-face with Rico, the neighborhood bully. It showed him fighting, not with his fists, but with his skills. The clip of his final shot, faking right, spinning left, then launching a fadeaway that swished perfectly through the net, played over and over again. And then the moment that truly sent the internet into a frenzy, Michael Jordan himself tossing the kid a pair of fresh, pristine Air Jordans. The caption on the original post said it all. A legend recognizes greatness before the world does. Within hours, the video racked up hundreds of thousands of views. By the next morning, it had crossed 1 million. Comments flooded in. This is why MJ will always be the GOAT. Someone get this kid a scholarship ASAP. From Ed, Rico manhandling the kid and finishing the game in minutes. Derek wiped sweat from his brow, exhaling sharply. He had to be smarter, faster. This time, when Rico tried to bulldoze past him, Derek anticipated it, stepping back just in time. Rico's momentum carried him too far forward, and Derek snatched the ball, spinning around him in a flash. He took a quick step, launched himself toward the basket, and laid it in. 1-1, Derek said, breathing heavy. A murmur ran through the crowd. Rico frowned. The next play, Rico went aggressive. He backed Derek into the post, elbows out, shoving hard before turning for an easy shot. 2-1. Derek responded with speed, cutting left, then right, leaving Rico off balance before hitting a fadeaway jumper. The net swished. 2-2. Now it was a battle. Jordan nodded, the hint of a smile forming. Rico was getting frustrated. He played dirty, hip-checking Derek, shoving, muttering under his breath. He scored again. 3-2. Derek adjusted. He quick-stepped around him, banking the ball off the glass. 3-3. Both were sweating now. Rico's arrogance was fading, replaced with something else. Annoyance. 4-4. Game point. Rico got the ball. This was it. He charged forward using every ounce of his strength, slamming Derek backward with his shoulder. Derek stumbled. His heel scraped the pavement, but he didn't fall. Jordan's smirk widened slightly. Now, he muttered, we got a game. Rico's breath was heavy, his chest rising and falling as he clenched his fists. The game had dragged on longer than he expected. His usual intimidation tactics weren't working, and the kid was still standing. Worse, he was keeping up. Derek dribbled the ball slowly, his fingers barely gripping it as he surveyed Rico. The street lights cast long shadows across the cracked pavement, the entire court watching in dead silence. Jordan stood off to the side, arms still crossed, his expression unreadable, but his eyes locked onto Derek with laser focus, studying his every move. One shot, Derek whispered to himself. One move. Rico's stance was firm, his feet planted like stone. He was bigger, stronger, and Derek knew if he tried to drive inside, he'd get bodied. He had to be smarter. Derek took a step right, just enough to sell the move. Rico lunged forward, expecting the drive, but Derek wasn't there anymore. With a sharp pivot, he spun left, crossing the ball behind his back. Rico stumbled, arms flailing as his footing gave out beneath him. The moment his body shifted off balance, Derek stepped back to the three-point line. The crowd gasped. Derek rose into the air, the ball leaving his fingertips in a smooth flick. The arc was perfect. The ball seemed to hang in the air forever, every pair of eyes locked on its path. Then, swish! The net barely moved as the ball snapped through the hoop. For a moment, there was silence. Then the court exploded. "Oh my God!" someone shouted. A few kids sprinted onto the pavement, hands on their heads. Others slapped their friends on the back, laughing in disbelief. Rico just stood there, frozen, his face twisted in fury, his jaw clenched so tightly it looked like his teeth might crack. Derek turned, wiping sweat from his forehead, his heart still hammering in his chest. He half expected Rico to start throwing punches. Instead, Rico swore under his breath, turned on his heel, and stormed off the court without another word. Derek was still breathing hard when he saw something fly toward him. Thump. He caught it instinctively, a shoebox. He looked up. Jordan was watching him, nodding approvingly. "Now you earned them," he said. The weight of the shoebox in Derek's hands felt heavier than it should have. His fingers traced the sleek edges, his breath unsteady. He had dreamed about owning a pair of Jordans, but never in his wildest imagination did he think he'd earn them like this. The entire court still buzzed with excitement, whispers and murmurs circling like electricity in the air. Rico was long gone, but the moment he left, Derek had felt the weight of something new settle on his shoulders. Then just as he was about to open the box, Jordan spoke again. "You got talent, kid," he said, his voice calm but firm. Derek looked up, surprised. Jordan's eyes weren't just watching him, they were evaluating him. "Ever played in an actual league?" Jordan continued. Derek hesitated. The excitement in his chest wavered, replaced by something tighter, heavier. "No," he admitted, his voice quieter than before. "Can't afford it." The court went still. Jordan nodded as if he expected the answer. He glanced at the kids still watching from the sidelines, some of them wearing worn-out sneakers just like Derek's, some of them knowing exactly what it felt like to want something so badly but be unable to reach it. Then Jordan smirked. "You can now." Derek blinked. What? Jordan took a step closer. I'm sponsoring you, kid. Happening. And then, all at once, the realization crashed into the kids like a tidal wave. A taller teen in the group suddenly stiffened, his eyes narrowing as he stared at the man in front of them. His breath hitched slightly before he turned to his friend, his voice hushed yet sharp with urgency. Yo, wait a minute, he muttered. That's... Another boy, slightly older, cut in. Dude, that's Michael Jordan. The name spread like a shockwave, hitting one kid after another until the entire crowd had the same stunned expression plastered across their faces. No way, someone gasped. Michael freaking Jordan? Derek's hands started shaking, not just from excitement, but from the sheer impossibility of it all. He looked up at the man in front of him, really looked this time. The sharp eyes, the unmistakable confidence, the way he carried himself like he had nothing to prove, but everything to give. The stories, the highlights, the posters in sneaker stores, the legend himself. Are you serious? Derek whispered, barely able to force the words out. Jordan just smirked. Derek felt his chest tighten, his heartbeat hammering against his ribs. His fingers twitched toward the shoes, but before he could make a move, a rough voice sliced through the silence like a knife. Yo, the voice sneered. Those aren't yours. The mood on the court shifted in an instant. Derek turned sharply toward the voice, his stomach sinking as he saw the figure stepping forward. A tall, broad-shouldered teen with a cocky grin and a menacing air about him. The court, once buzzing with excitement, now bristled with tension. Jordan's smirk faded slightly, his eyes locking onto the newcomer. Derek, still holding his breath, tightened his grip around his old broken sneaker. Something told him this wasn't over yet. A heavy silence fell over the court as a figure stepped forward from the crowd. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and walked with the kind of confidence that made people instinctively move out of his way. His sleeveless jersey revealed arms thick with muscle, and the smirk on his face told everyone he knew exactly what he was doing. He cracked his knuckles, his gaze locked onto Derek. Yo, he said again, this time slower, like he was savoring the moment. Those aren't yours. Derek clutched the broken remains of his old sneakers against his chest. His pulse pounded in his ears. He knew exactly who this was. Everyone did. Rico, a local street baller with a reputation for humiliating younger players. He ran this court, and anyone who stepped on it knew one thing. If Rico didn't like you, he'd make sure you left with bruises, both on your body and your pride. Michael Jordan, standing calm and composed, glanced at the towering teenager. That how things work around here? He asked, voice casual but firm. Rico shrugged, shifting his weight. Look, old man, respect's earned, not given, he said, flashing a grin at his crew. If the kid wants new shoes, he should earn them. Derek swallowed. Rico tilted his head, nodding toward the basketball hoop. One-on-one. Me versus him. A murmur spread through the crowd. Some kids chuckled under their breath. They'd seen Rico play. He was relentless, bigger, stronger, and more experienced than Derek. Derek hesitated, his hands tightening into fists at his sides. Jordan smirked slightly, tilting his head. And what happens when the kid wins? The laughter from Rico's crew was immediate. If he wins? Rico snorted, shaking his head. Man, come on. He looked back at Derek, eyes narrowing. Kid ain't gonna win. Jordan crossed his arms. Maybe, he said. Maybe not. Rico folded his arms. You scared, kid? Derek's throat was dry. He could feel every pair of eyes on him, waiting for his response. His instincts screamed at him to walk away, but deep down another voice whispered something different. A challenge, a chance. He took a slow breath, exhaling through his nose. Then he lifted his chin, squared his shoulders, and met Rico's stare head-on. I'll do it. The crowd erupted. Jordan just smiled. The ball hit the pavement with a sharp thud, echoing across the court. The tension in the air was thick as Rico smirked, spinning the ball on his finger. He towered over Derek, his confidence radiating off him like heat from the sun-baked asphalt. Game to 5, Rico said, rolling his shoulders. No crying when you lose. Derek swallowed hard but nodded. He wasn't about to back down now. Michael Jordan stood at the edge of the court, arms crossed, watching closely. His face was unreadable, but his eyes flicked between the two players with interest. Stay focused, kid, he murmured. Rico started with possession, palming the ball like it was nothing. The second Derek got into a defensive stance, Rico drove forward, slamming his shoulder into the smaller boy's chest. Derek staggered back as Rico easily laid the ball in. 1-0, Rico called. The crowd chuckled. This was what they expect. Boom! The ball slammed through the net, the rim rattling from the impact. Derek landed smoothly, barely hearing the eruption of cheers around him. Instead, he turned toward the sideline, locking eyes with Jordan once more. No words were needed. Jordan simply nodded, the smallest of smiles playing at the corner of his lips. Derek jogged back down the court, wiping sweat from his brow, heart pounding. But not from exhaustion, from something deeper. Because this moment wasn't about the dunk. It wasn't about the shoes. It was about the belief. The screen faded to black, and the final words appeared in bold, white letters. Greatness is never given. It's earned.